As humans, we understand what it's like to live in social groups. We form important bonds with friends and family that help us survive. There are many other animals that do this as well, and there's one such animal on this rock over here.
Whenever we think about social animals, we probably think about other mammals like ourselves. Sociality isn't really associated with reptiles, but little guys like this skink here are starting to show us otherwise. The extent of sociality in reptiles is something that's only recently come to light. Scientists are only beginning to grasp how complex these interactions can be. Julia Riley from Macquarie University in Sydney is studying an elusive skink to try and figure out how and why sociality can actually work.
This is an Australian tree skink. It lives in southern New South Wales, Victoria, and into South Australia. And they're quite widespread and common, yet you can see that they're quite camouflaged. They are brown to gray and with these black speckling and stripes all throughout their body, and this is because they live on rocks and trees, but particularly inside rock and tree crevices. And what's really interesting about these skinks is actually that they live in groups inside these crevices. And particularly with the tree skink, they seem to live sometimes alone, but then sometimes in really large groups. And so I'm trying to figure out why this happens.
Julia, these skinks are so elusive. How do you manage to study their social systems?
Yeah, so that's a huge challenge because these lizards are crevice dwelling, so they live in these small crevices. They're very camouflaged, and they basically don't even like to come out because they want to hide from predatory birds and from snakes. So what we have done is that we have a study site in Albury in New South Wales, and we've marked all the rocks and all the trees that have crevices that they like to use as habitat. And what we do is we go out and we try and catch pretty much every skink in the population, and we do that by using really long poles called lizard nooses. And basically it's like fishing for a skink. So you have to sit very far away and then basically put a little loop of wire around that skink's head, and then pull it tight, and then we put it in a bucket.
So your goal is to catch pretty much every skink at the study site. What do you do once you catch them?
Once we have them in hand, each individual has a little internal pit tag, it's called, and that has a code. Once we scan it with a machine, and that tells us who that skink is. Then we measure that skink, so how long it is, how much it weighs. This tells us their growth rate and probably gives us a clue to what age they are. We sex them, so we see if they're male or female or if they're still a juvenile. And then the last step is we put two small stickers on them with their observation number to identify them and mark where they are and who they're with. When we collect a lizard, we take a DNA sample, and this allows us to figure out who that individual lizard is related to throughout the entire population.
So by taking a DNA sample of every individual, you can figure out who is related to who across the whole study site, and then figure out whether or not they're actually living in family groups based on your observations throughout the site.
Scientists who've studied sociality in lizards so far have started to think that lizards start forming groups when the population has a limited resource. And then when they're in these groups, they gain benefits just from having other lizards nearby. They can spot predators a lot faster. Also, studies have shown that lizards that are living in groups actually get a thermal benefit from being in that group. They're actually at a higher temperature and more within what's called their optimal temperature range. These are just some of the thoughts about why lizards may benefit from living in groups, and because this research field is so new, we still have a lot more work to do to figure out how lizards benefit from being social.
You know, it's a shame that reptiles are sometimes viewed as really cold-blooded and very unlike us. But hopefully as we learn more about the different social interactions they have, we'll start to realize that maybe under the skin or under the scales, we're not so different after all.
You're correct, James O'Hanlon.
Thank you, Julia Riley. All right.